Well, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Development Discourse, where we ideate for Africa's development. My name is Patrick Okibo, founding partner at Next Year. Next Year is a multi-competency advisory and investment firm focused on addressing Africa's complex development challenges. Across the continent, and particularly in Nigeria, we've become very good at diagnosing our problems. We write plans, we pass laws, we set up great institutions and announce reforms with confidence. Yet daily life remains stubbornly unchanged. The gap is not knowledge, it's more conversion, the ability to turn intent into sustained institutional performance. Today's conversation, which we've titled Getting Elephants to Dance, Improving Effectiveness of Government Institutions, is a metaphor that is quite deliberate. Large public institutions are often described as too big or too slow or too political to change. And yet history, rarely but unmistakably, shows that they can move. The real question is not whether these elephants, these huge institutions, can dance, but whether or under what conditions they do, and why these conditions are so difficult for us to reproduce. To explore this very important issue with me is Ifueko Omoigui Okauru. She's someone who did not just observe institutional reforms from the sidelines, but lived it from the inside the arena. As the executive chairman of Nigeria's Federal Inland Revenue Service, or public sector transformations in recent history, she navigated laws, politics, resistance, and execution in a system that's not really designed for easy change. This conversation is not about heroism or best practices. It's a conversation about hard choices, trade-offs, power and discipline, about what it really takes to make institutions work. And when these factors pull in different directions, how we do indeed get the institutions to dance. Ifueko, welcome.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon.
Thank you. And, there's this line from Douglas North on institutions that I often return to. He states that institutions are not merely laws we pass, but the rules, people must believe that would actually be enforced. I have always wondered how the man in the arena, or, referencing Teddy Roosevelt, or in your case, the woman in the arena, conceptualizes this point, that North has made. So in FIRS, before you got there were laws, there were rules. As you began your reforms, what were the first things that changed? Was it the rules, or the way you enforced them, or the people's belief that enforcement was finally going to stick? What was it that changed as you started that process?
That's an interesting question. First of all, thank you for this conversation, to give me questions that were completely unplanned for, and we're going to together navigate this process.
Yes.
So first of all, my understanding of the question first was derived from a quote you said from North.
Yes.
That institutions are not just laws, but rules that people want enforced. And tied to that, you've asked that what was the first thing that changed? Was it rules, or was it law, or was it?
Or was it just the belief the people had that, you were going to enforce those rules that have always been on the books?
Okay, it's difficult to say. Okay, it's very difficult to say, because again, when you say change, where does it start from? What do you define as change? Okay. And so, because change resides in so many different places. Change resides in the individual. Change is even in me, who is leading the change. Change is in the people who are expecting the change. Change is in stakeholders who are supporting the change. And all these in themselves make up the institution that you want changed. So when you ask the question, what was the first thing that changed? I don't know. But perhaps it's me. It's not me from a perspective of change from what I stood for. But it was change in how I conceptualize the problem. Because if I didn't conceptualize the problem in a particular way, it could have taken me in a completely different direction. Now, I don't even know whether that is even change or just a fact. But I can say that in accepting the office, I knew, and that's a change. I'd never worked in the public sector before. So that was a change. And I knew that something needed to give. The mandate I had from the president directly was to transform the Federal Inland Revenue Service, but more importantly, not even transform the Federal Inland Revenue Service, was to transform the tax system. And before me were groups and teams of people who had done a lot of work, and I give a lot of credit to them. So you had the Dotun Phillips study group on taxation, was over a year old, where they traveled and came up with a study group report. That was under, I believe, Adam, Chiroma, who was minister at the time. And then Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala took over, set up another working group on taxation to review the work of the study group. They come up with another report. And it was that report that the president said I needed to implement and execute without any guardrails. I would say guardrails because I believe he understood that there are limits I wouldn't go through, and perhaps that's the reason why he chose me. But that, so this is what you need to do. So given that, so the change was from never working in the public sector to working in the public sector, to thinking through how to approach the challenge. And maybe even if I step back a bit, perhaps the change didn't even start with me. The change started with the president. Seriously, the more I reflect on it, because when he was talking to me, or when I was getting background about, because I went through, you could say, an interview process, of meeting the president, getting to know what his expectations are, and so on. He did mention, and I believe it was also the PS at the time that mentioned, that his views on tax were informed by one of his friends or one of the committees that he had set up that had counseled him that he needed to put in place a strong tax system.
Okay.
And that tax system had to not rely on oil and gas. So in fact, my mandate was to grow non-oil revenue.
Interesting.
And I believe part of that was also driven by the environment. If I remember correctly, around that time, oil prices had dropped, I believe, to $10 a barrel, if I recall correctly. So that was a change of, wait a minute, if things really got so bad, we need to do something about it. So it didn't start with me, by the way. It started with the president. And that's why, in fact, interestingly, there's a good question you asked that question. I'm reflecting on it. Because ultimately, the chief tax officer isn't the head of the FRS, or as is known now, the National Revenue Service, Nigerian Revenue Service. It's the president.
Yep.
Because tax is at the center of governance. Any positive or negative government, when I say negative, so you even talk about bandits, any government, whichever way you go, needs revenue to drive its success, however it defines success. So whoever is driving that bid must believe in the reforms or whatever reforms that need to be done to achieve the intent. So now I have the answer to your question. It started before I was even identified. It started with Mr. President. So your question now presumes that when I now came in, after you finish all these contextual issues, what do I feel helped the process a lot more? Was it rules? So I'm reframing your question.
Yes.
Was it rules? Was it law? Was it beliefs? And for me, without a doubt, it was earning the trust of the people. It didn't happen overnight. It didn't happen in 1 year. It didn't happen in 2 years. It was a journey. But it had to do with earning the trust, showing results, showing that, wait a minute, it looks like this may work, affecting the belief system that perhaps this may be an opportunity for real change. And that, as you constantly build on that, truly provides the environment for change.
Interesting. There's so many vistas to go down, and I'll see if we can get to all of them. But let me stay on institutions for a little bit. And I'm sure you know Samoglu and Robinson's work in institutions and how they usually fail when they collide with powerful interest groups. Looking back now, which interests did you decide had to be confronted at FIRS when you started the reforms? And which ones did you choose very deliberately not to fight? And the thinking here is there's so many interest groups, and how does one in your position decide on who to take on, who not to take on, if reforms are going to yield results?
Another very interesting
And I'm
question.
not saying to name them, but just how you went through sifting through, who to engage and who not to at that time.
Well, I mean, the truth is some of the things you're talking about is actually in the public space. So naming them, I mean, it's not naming as individuals, but naming as blocks. But let me get your question right, first of all, before I respond. Which interest did I have to confront? Is that what you asked? And which one did I decide to take on? And which one decide not to take on?
At the time, realizing that no reformer ever has all the powers, even if the president is backing you, has all the powers to just step in and begin to change things. There are different interest groups that would lose out in every reform. How did you pick and choose which interest groups to engage, win, so that you can move on to the next thing?
Okay. Again, I may be forced to reframe your question, but I'll try and attempt it because the question is, which interest group did I choose to engage or not engage? And I'm asking myself, was it an issue or because you engage is actually slightly different from confront or not confront.
Maybe confront. Maybe confront is the word.
You could decide to confront but not engage.
Yeah.
Yes. So and they're quite different. Now, okay, first of all, there are many interests in revenue. Okay? And the interests in revenue are multiple. Some you know, some you don't know. Okay? So if it is about choosing which group, the issue of choosing a group didn't occur to me. It wasn't about choosing a group. It was more about what did we need to do as a country? What kind of agenda did we need to have? And how do we execute that agenda? And in executing that agenda, which stakeholders were critical to it? Now, in the development of the agenda, one had to be mindful, which is where I believe one of your questions come in, of to what extent will this attract more intense heat? And which
Correct.
one could you meander through, even with its own risks, and still be successful? Okay? And one thing I can say was in the agenda or in the report, it's a very interesting question because it's forcing me to think about so many things. In the report that was handed over to me in 2004, and this is 2026, the decision of the working group was for us to have a national revenue authority, which is what we have to some extent today. And we pondered on it, and even to change the name of the FRS. The FRS was not an autonomous organization. It was basically running as it was running under the auspices of the Personal Income Tax Act and the Companies Income Tax Act, and as part of the civil service. And in a sense, an extension of the Ministry of Finance, you could put it that way. So, first of all, you have to battle getting autonomy from the Ministry of Finance. You didn't have, the only staff you had were tax officers. It wasn't set up, you could say, as an organization corporate. So there were certain, what you could say, foundational issues that in building an organization you needed if you wanted to add, other things to that, to responsibility to that organization. So the choice in taking what the working group had suggested was that we were not ready to do a National Revenue Authority at the time.
Okay.
And that because the National Revenue Authority, as actually conceptualized by the working group, was to pull out FRS, customs, merge, pull them into one autonomous organization. Remember, if you look at other African organizations, or even the UK, which has the HM Revenue and Customs, that was in a sense, the way things were moving at the time, and still are moving at the time. And considering customs that had its focus, I mean, customs continue to be a partner organization to the FRS with its own issues, FRS with its own issues, the local governments, the states. Remember, at that time, there were issues between federal government and states. The current president, I believe, at the time, was governor of Lagos State, and there were tensions.
And at the helm of the fight.
And even to get Lagos to cooperate was, something that you needed to, gently make sure it happened, which it did. So the choice was, let's focus first on building the FRS as an institution. We still added some additional functions, which was an ongoing fight. For example, we're supposed to continue to collect royalties. So at the federal level, there were things we were taking over, but they were still fighting. So I'm happy today, hopefully that fight should have subsided. So the decision was that if you focus on building an autonomous FRS, keep the name as it is. Don't start people misreading your intentions, because all you want to do is really build professionalism. Then when the institution is ready and has shown good cause, then moving to the next level of being a national revenue service will be a natural next step. So the deliberate choice to therefore focus on FRS, set up for the very first time an FRS Establishment Act, come up with a tax reform agenda for the very first time, come up with a national tax policy for the very first time. So basically position taxation as a professional path that was critical to the survival of Nigeria build the professional core beyond just the revenue officers. We needed massive recruitment on a professional basis and so on. So you're not distracted with other interests because, hey, we're taking my powers. So those were the
Yes.
kinds of things that were done
Mm.
to therefore manage or work with what you could focus on and do well within the time period. I remember at that time I wasn't I was chair of what we call Federal Board of Inland Revenue with a tenure of 3 years, renewable, different, no law. It was just an
Mm-hmm.
appointment by Mr. President. So there was a lot of systems building, process building, and so on. So with that, you still had vested interests that could topple even the one that you decided to focus on, but you were able to manage that better. And then focus on the processes and systems so that way you are not picking and choosing which stakeholder. You're
Yes.
focusing on issues like this is our vision, this is our mission, these are our values, this is where we are going. And if in the process you kind of are affected by it, then we deal with it as we progress.
Yes. Yes.
Now, I must say that
Yes.
one group that I recognize was a critical part of, I would say, resistance to some of the changes that were putting in place were the group I'll call the tax consultants. I'm not talking consultants now from perspective of institutional building, but people who would use revenue
Collect
based
tax on behalf of the government. Yeah.
exactly. Because we're trying to build a professional core that will automatically reduce the need for that group, if at all you even need them at all. I didn't
Yes.
anticipate how fierce that was. Apart from the fact that when I first came into office, you are normally hit with, like, in fact, that was the first thing I noticed, near 100 proposals to consult on your behalf. All right. So shelving that and just focus on building a professional core was basically the approach. So I didn't realize how much that was an issue until it was time for my approval as executive chairman of the National Assembly. Then the battle to stop
Mm.
me from the renewal
Mm.
started. So 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 I won't say, therefore, back to your question
No, no.
of, have I answered it?
Yes, so I think you've touched on it, which is, that there'll be different groups to confront, and it's to figure out your sequencing, you build up some strength before you take on the next group, et cetera, et cetera. And in your case, it was to build up the institution, before taking on all these other guys. But maybe even a follow-on question to that. Professor Richard Joseph, who's also been a guest on the show, famously described Nigeria in his seminal book as a prebendal state, where offices often serve networks, rather than the public. And I suspect beyond dealing with the tax consultants, who are external to this point, that you must have also had to contend with the issue of uprooting the corruption within the system and around the system. Yeah. So the question, therefore, is, was your goal to uproot that system entirely, or was it more about constraining it so that the institution could still function? So here I'm getting into the brass tacks of it. How do you deal with corruption, which is, you can even say, the operating system in many of these institutions? Do you focus on it head on, we've got to take a moral sword to it and destroy it, or fix some, keep a blind eye on some others? How does that work in practice?
Okay, now maybe before I answer your question, there was a statement you attributed to the gentleman, I can't recall his name, that Nigeria is a prebendal state. Can you
Richard
repeat?
Joseph. Yeah.
Richard Joseph, yes.
Prebendal, where, yeah, yes. Yeah,
Prebendal
so
that
the
does what?
idea is, people are appointed into office. They never see themselves as really serving the state. They see themselves as, dispensing prebends, to their co-religionists, their ethnic, familial groups, versus serving the interest of the broader nation or the public. Now, in most institutions in Nigeria, you find that. My question, therefore, is, when you found that in FIRS, did you attack it head on, that we've got to wipe it clean? Or how did you make the judgment call, to deal with some, let some slide, just to keep driving the reforms?
Okay, now let me answer you twofold. One is I have a different view on Nigeria.
Okay.
A very different view. I mean, I know my late brother sometimes will be telling me once I got when I got into office, you are in a bubble. That maybe the
Yeah.
bubble will burst one day. Who knows? I may still be in a bubble. However, but I think, I mean, it's been 22 years now since I entered FRS. I've learned a lot, not just through the work that I've done at the FRS, but also work I've done since. Add that to work I did before, both at a local and an international level. I've also seen countries outside Nigeria change governments. I've seen those governments do exactly the same thing that we're being accused of in Nigeria. So I would argue that I wouldn't categorize Nigeria like Nigeria is some outlier there that does this particular way of doing things. And we need to fix the problem in Nigeria. I think I will argue that as humans, if you do not put those guardrails, if you do not instill in society certain kinds of processes, if you do not give people a belief structure where they feel that the system is fair to them, if you do not, as humans, guarantee people with a minimum quality of life, a minimum standard, where they feel that indeed the country has been good to them, people behave in particular ways. And and that's not to say that what you see in our institutions doesn't have the symptoms we are talking about. But I don't want to label it as a Nigerian issue because, again, it goes back to the framing of the problem and the framing of the challenge.
Mm.
And in the framing, if you think the problem is Nigeria because we're Nigerians, then we're just going downhill, and I don't think there's going to be anything to address because it won't change. I don't think it will change.
Mm-hmm.
And the truth is not a fact. We can, I remember in certain classes when I was attending my public policy program in Harvard, and some guy would be giggling at the back, and they're talking about developing countries. He'd just be shaking his head. He said, these guys have not been to our municipal authorities, and they don't know what's going on there. So some of the things we say may be just because we do not know and we don't understand.
Mm-hmm.
Now, having said that, it still doesn't mean I will answer your question of was there corruption? I think corruption goes hand in hand with tax, beyond the fact that it's or anything to do with money. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
even banks, if you don't put in place very strong systems, strong controls, anywhere that people have direct access to money beyond anything else or discretionary power, there's a chance that you'll abuse it as a human being.
Mm-hmm.
So there's that reality. And so for me, first of all, I got into the FRS naive, and I think I progressively got more knowledgeable. Now, I was hit, and I can tell you that was a change for me too. I was hit by the sheer number of complaints, problems, challenges, fake tax clearance certificate, fake this, fake that, because we're doing a lot of public communication, and my phones were not stopping, ringing and so on. And we used to do a lot of stakeholder sessions at the time. So I remember, and I don't know, I'm going to say, I may have said it at some sessions before, but the person who actually told me this may remember. It was one of those stakeholder sessions. And I kept on talking about, look, you can't be corrupt, you can't be this, you can't be that. And then one guy called me aside. And for me, that was like an inflection point. It was really a game changer. He called me aside and said, Madam, when you talk like this, you make us, you deflate us.
Mm.
It's like all of us are bad, are corrupt, you know. Um, we're showing that we're willing to change and to improve and to see what can be done. But it's this messaging, oh, we're corrupt, this is not helping the landscape. And the guy was right.
Mm.
The guy was on the money. So I changed my approach.
Mm.
And it wasn't even therefore about corruption or no corruption. It was more about we've set rules. We've drawn a line. We're not looking at what you did in the past. Because there are so many issues and reasons you could say are why people behave in a particular way. In fact, at some point, there was this compliance there was this triangle of where even if you increase compensation, there are people who will change because they are not hardcore
Mm-hmm.
fraudsters or whatever. They are just trying to survive. And there are those, no matter what you do, they're still going to steal. Okay? And that happens in human society. And that's why you have the enforcement group and all that. So the approach was more as we had been doing, actually. It was just the messaging that was focus on the people,
Mm-hmm.
focus on improving their welfare, focus on removing that, what you could call temptation,
Mm-hmm.
do the wrong thing. So those were the things and incentives that drove me to change the compensation structure as we're implementing and executing the structure, decisions around procurement, decisions around deployment. People knew that you could come to me to say you wanted to be deployed to another place. No, there was nothing like you were staying in a particular place for over 4 years. No, you were changed.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so putting emphasis on things that helped build the professionalizing of people in spite of themselves, and educating, advocating, and trying to build a feeling that we can do this right. But if you cross the
Exactly.
line in this
Yeah, with
new
you. Mm-hmm.
realm, then we do not hesitate to enforce. In fact, for the very
Yeah.
first time, and I don't think it has even happened since then, we actually prosecuted people for having fake tax clearance certificates.
Hmm.
All right? We set up a criminal investigation division. We were the ones that, brought in the police to work side by side with us within the service. So many things to do and then we introduced taxpayer services to educate the public. So the public knew, for example, that it was actually better for you to follow the law because they didn't know
Yeah.
that in following the law, you could actually reduce your taxes. Sometimes by engaging and trying to go, because when you talk about corruption, it wasn't one way, it's a two-way thing. The person who is advising and you that is agreeing, you're all part of the same system. So it was more about systemic change, rules change, advocacy change, and so over
Yeah.
the period, and then of course pushing that we passed the Establishment Act, which was passed in 2007. When we were even recruiting, we knew that we needed a more professional style. I may not get the numbers right, but just look at this from a percentage point of view. Maybe
Mm-hmm.
70 or 90% of the people in the organization didn't have any skills to do any professional tax work. Only 10% did. So we needed to reverse it. And by the time I left, we had reversed it. And we had set up a whole process of transiting people from where they were at to where they could be by asking people, you know what, go back to school. We'll fund you while you are there, you know. So those are the things we're putting in place, and trying as much as possible to also put in place a professional recruitment process, starting internally. So you had a system where we didn't just promote people, but you applied for the new structure in the new organization. And so if you were a level 8 staff but had all this experience and all these skills, you could easily move to be a level 10 or level 12 on a new position with the skills you had based on interviews. There were massive recruitment interviews going on. And the whole idea was to restore trust and
Yes.
credibility.
Interesting.
So it wasn't about, so corruption was not like a focus, because honestly, if that had been a focus, I don't think we would have done much.
Interesting. Interesting. You at the beginning you talked about how you met with the president, how the president himself had changed from his interaction with someone, and then he put you in the role. To what extent did having the president's backing enable the reforms that went on in FIRS? And the question here
100%.
is really, there's this assumption that you can't really drive significant transformation unless you've got this massive political support from the president. But there's also the counter narrative that the president is distracted in many angles and may not be able to do much more after that appointment. So in practical terms, how did that relationship with the president work, especially when you needed to drive the more difficult parts of the reform?
Look, for the kind of person I am, okay, I think it was a very good relationship. Now, let me explain what I mean. The president could get things, people sending him letters, and he sends to me, please execute or treat. I'll look at the letter. If not something we can do, I write back, I'm sorry, I cannot do it. That was the kind of relationship we had. And it was 100% supportive. 100% supportive. So, and I say this, that change is part of one person cannot make change happen. I'm talking to you now because I led the tax reform, but I cannot take credit as the only person that made the change happen. No, it's impossible. Yeah. One is part of an entire ecosystem. The presidency, the Minister of Finance, the Revenue Service, the Civil Service Commission. If I had an issue with the Civil Service Commission, we went there, stakeholders and all that. When we passed the law, they were the first people to say, no, you cannot do this, so we have to engage. Because if that didn't work out, we may not have been able to do certain things that we needed to do. So everybody contributed. I remember when I first came in, there were petitions out there. We were bringing in another outsider to come in. It was the SGF at the time, Kaite, who had to call. I didn't know this, but he called later and told me this was what was happening, spoke to the unions to say, give this lady a chance. So you can't do change if you lose your job. You can't do change if your hands are tied. You can't do change if what you want to do is not supported and there's no alignment between what you want to do. That doesn't mean it doesn't change. The alignment doesn't change. Not that the alignment should always be there, but what you want to do may be like, okay, maybe I need to step back a little bit. But that alignment, you must believe in what you're driving, and the environment will be receptive. I actually thank the taxpayers. I believe we got the needs of the taxpayers right. A lot of the mass communication direct to the taxpayer resonated with them. If the taxpayers didn't respond to the changes were needed, it would have been tougher. So they're part of that ecosystem. And therefore, change has to have all of those ingredients. Otherwise, you don't build the confidence and trust in a system that affects every single person without any exception.
And where I'm going with that question is, when we listen to commentary on reforms in Nigeria, you know, one of the things we hear always is the political will or the president's body language. And I know that the president who appointed you, you know, is a strong character, very forceful personality. But did you have to rely on him, on his powers a lot to drive transformation? Or was it really he gave you the mandate and you worked within the ecosystem? I'm trying to see, you know, to what extent is our situation tied to the president's body language or political will? Or is it just a failure of the people who've been tasked to do something, not having the ability to do it?
You know, I don't want this to be a black or white issue, because life isn't black or white, okay? Life is a mixture of colors. Life, there's a spectrum of capabilities, there's a spectrum of powers. And somewhere in between, you get the sweet spot of what works at a particular time. I think I happened to be the right person at that time for different reasons. And there may be other right persons. But I can talk a little bit about me that endeared me to being able to move things a lot in a particular way that gave me I knew it's likely to come out with certain outcomes. One of it was that I didn't come in, and that's the issue of how I define the problem. I didn't come in purely as just there to increase tax revenue. The mandate, which fitted into all the work I'd ever done before then, was to change, was to build an institution. That's what I love doing. It's like, I tell people sometimes, I can advise banks, I've done that in the past, but I'm not sure I'll be a good banker. You know, there are certain traits, there are certain attitudes, there are certain behaviors. I'm going to say I admire that in people. Everybody, you need to know what you know how to do. You need to know what you love to do. You know, so the mandate and how I also framed it was aligned to what I've been doing through my working experience. So that helped. And I can tell you that my accepting the job was particularly influenced by one thing I believe the permanent secretary or private secretary at the time said, and also the president at the time said, was that I had a blank sheet of paper. As a person, you can't motivate me more. It's not, everybody needs to know what incentivizes you. That was what got, you know, you have a blank sheet of paper, go. And I went. I'm an artist and I'm not an artist. I'm a creator and I'm not a creator. So I don't draw art, but I'm an artist. I'm a creator. I try and in my mind create things and I want to see it come to life. So that was such a beautiful mandate that here is the reform we want. You have a blank sheet of paper and I'm empowering you, go do it. And prior training shows that you can't be independent. In fact, I was having a session recently I think there was something in the judiciary and we're discussing judiciary independence. I said, we sweat a lot about this issue of independence so much that we forget that we're actually interdependent. So, and that comes from my, COVID related training and so on, that we're an independent world. So I knew that. So even though it was, you have a blank sheet of paper, I knew I wasn't alone. And so one of the things we did was stakeholder mapping, going around, I need your help, I need your support. National Assembly, ministries, agencies. By the time we came up with the tax reform agenda, it wasn't my agenda. It was an agenda that was built up with staff, built on my training, things I was done. I came in not just with my tax experience, I came in as a management consultant, things that I was doing anyway. So those things helped. So to answer your question, if you've been given a charge, first of all, it should be aligned to what you can handle. It should be aligned to what you have the skills to do. That doesn't mean you are not a competent person. All right. If you decide, no, these are so, and if there's a gap, then you fill it with those who have those skills, because skills are important. Okay, but character is just as important.
Yeah.
So if for example, in handling, in looking around and seeing that, wait a minute, when you get into public office, procurement is something that people typically could actually how will I put it, topple a leader.
Yes.
Not because the leader is doing anything on procurement, but because of the perception that you must be doing something. So one of the first things I did was if you're putting a procurement process in place, and let the process work. And I will tell people, come to me if the process is not working. And if the process is working, then we'll move on. So it's those kinds of things that you first of all, you have the empowerment to, and usually when a president appoints you or a minister appoints you within an agency, you should assume you have those powers.
Yes.
But you should also recognize that it's not you're not independent in executing those powers.
Yes.
And that you need to be working with all others, including those that appoint you, understand the expectations, ensure you align with the expectations, ensure there's regular briefings. I mean, for example, I was part, and not me making it happen, the minister making it happen, of an economic team. Well, I think it was a team of 13 or 12, I can't remember the number. And we're meeting regularly. So beyond the presidency, there was an economic team. That in passing on what we're doing, there was alignment. So when we're setting up team, for example, and discussing with the CBN, who was at the time trying to execute BVN, we knew why we didn't need to move them together, because we needed to ensure that people even understood the need for people. We're all working together for one common objective, to uplift Nigeria and make Nigeria better.
Fantastic. Fantastic. I'm happy that you raised the judiciary and that you're doing some work with them, because there are some scholars, James Q. Wilson is one of them, who's argued that bureaucracies behave very differently depending on how clear their tasks are and how visible their performance could be. So if you take FIRS, for instance, you can clearly measure when FIRS is winning, if the numbers are, the tax numbers are going up, et cetera, et cetera. But there are some agencies that are more difficult, so if you look at like the judiciary, and if you wanted to transform the judiciary, the tasks are a bit amorphous. So can we say that some of the things you did at the FIRS could work in the judiciary, or do we need another approach because the way their tasks are measured are quite different? What's your view on that?
You have some very beautiful questions. And by the way, you really read a lot of books. That's something I want to do when I grow up. I mean, you're quoting these books. I'm like, oh my gosh, how am I going to get the time to read all these things? So thank you for your contribution. I really appreciate this, Patrick. Now, the things I'm discussing are not peculiar to FIRS. If you step back and ask yourself, what do we need to do to change? And I think it's something people have been saying, am I going to write a book? Am I going to write? I really think I will at some point.
And you should, Ifueko. You should.
I should. And, putting my thoughts together. Now, you could say the devil is in the details, but it's not the details of what you do. It's almost like, okay, in any organization, and you want to implement performance improvement. Of course, the person who's working in finance or in accounting, the way you measure their performance is going to be different from HR. It's going to be different from somebody who's in facility management. It's going to be different from your marketing function. But they all should have targets. They all should have targets. Okay, so I think in changing an institution, what I find, which is at the root of perhaps what we need to first address, is we need to be pragmatic. Sometimes we take on too much. And when you take on too much, I mean, we have a program called 4 Disciplines of Execution. And one of the things it teaches is that research has shown that if you do more than 2 things, the chances of you doing all of them are near 0. You can even stretch it to 3, but honestly, the more you do, the less you achieve. I think there's certain things we need to teach ourselves. One is we want to change overnight. It doesn't happen. Okay, I discussed FRS. Right in 2003, there's a recommendation for us to have a National Revenue Service. We reduced our expectations and focused on what we felt we could do. Even that one, we didn't finish. Even that, we didn't finish. But to ask me, are there things that we didn't? Oh, many. So many things. The use of technology remains an issue. Okay, and I wish we would have pushed technology a lot more. I mean, people like InterSwitch, I mean, if you talk to their growth and so on, is tied to what we're doing in FRS, and they've moved to where they are now. So we could have done a lot more with technology. But remember, what were we dealing with? We're dealing with, you get revenue data here, you get revenue data, not the same. So we had to focus first on, let's even automate collection to start with, So going back to, FRS is different. No. I think change, so first of all, we need to be pragmatic. I think a lot of things we say are nice in theory, but they're not pragmatic. They're not real. We need to be real. And then we need to, based on the realities that we face, ask ourselves, what can we do and do well? Because what that does, it ignites in us the energy to know, you mean you can do this, and then you move on to the next. So it's those, I would call it philosophical things, you could call it processes, the belief that something can be done. And so if you have a team, so okay, let me give you an example of even team. You need a team. And that team, in whatever you are choosing to do, must think as one. If the team itself is divided on that one thing, it's tough to work, because as soon as you leave the room, everybody's scattered. They're doing their different things. So when people talk about investment in what we used to call soft skills, all right, soft skills, communication, teamwork, collaboration, that's the first thing people throw away and say, no, we don't want to do it. Let's go for the technical. How do you use a computer? Without realizing that, in fact, I went somewhere and they said, no, soft skills are no longer called soft skills, called power skills. There are certain things that cut across humanity, that cut across organizational design, take Nigeria as an organization. We're not talking as one. It's as fundamental as that. We haven't crafted something, a vision that we can all believe in, so that in our little corners, we're doing our own bit. There's too much division. And it has to cross party lines. We have to move away from a situation where, because you're in a particular party, you must counter the other party. Or because you're in a particular party, everything else the other party is doing is not good. No. We need to focus on why are we here? Why are we here? We're here to make Nigeria a better place. So if you talk about the judiciary, if all you're focused on, you want an independent judiciary, is that practical? As a human being, are you completely independent? Can't we think about ways to build a judiciary that is decision independent, where your decisions are seen to be fair, and focus on building systems that engender trusted collaboration with the different arms? We keep talking about this agenda, that we know is not going to work. So it's not different, Patrick. You need to believe in what you want to do. You need to have a vision. You need to have clear objectives. In 1 year, what do you want to achieve? And you can measure, and it need to be measured. And then you need to track it. And then you need to self-correct it. And you need to get feedback. And you need to ensure that all stakeholders have to be part of it. Those are ingredients for effective change management.
Mm.
Wherever
Interesting.
you are.
Interesting. When you talked about the people, you mentioned, you fixed the performance management system, you fixed incentives, promotions, etc. You talked about a salary structure. I'd like you to touch a little bit on how you were able to implement a different salary structure from the rest of the civil service. But my core question, though, is, was there any small, at the time, seemingly insignificant thing you did, which ended up resulting in this surprisingly big effect, in the reform process? I asked that question because sometimes when we think about transformation and reforms, we're thinking about all these big, grand things we change. But I think that there could be some small thing that happened, and the unexpected consequence, had a much bigger effect on the reform. Was there anything like that?
Yeah, I can think of two.
Okay.
And I must say, when doing those two, I honestly didn't know that 20 plus years after, I'll still be on the street, people saying, "Oh, thank you for that." I never knew. I just did it because that's all I knew how to do.
Mm.
The first one was recruitment. Putting in place a recruitment process that was seen to be fair, that people, it seems a bit sad that I'm being acknowledged that they got into FRS without knowing anybody.
It's the system we're in. Mm-hmm.
Which is what they should be doing anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? I must say, my naivety, I didn't know how bad things were. And I'm not just discussing FR, I'm talking about generally. You have people who do not believe. They sincerely do not believe that if an advert is out and you apply and you are qualified for the job, that you will be taken. They don't believe it. And that's a sad thing. And it's not to say that you're not going to have politics, you're not going to have pressure, but to have the preponderance of people feel that way, they've lost hope. So in fact, the two things I'm going to talk about is about giving hope. The second was, and I must say some of these things, somebody said I should have written my memo when I left off because it would be fresher. Okay, I'll come back to the second one. Take recruitment. I remember arguments. Where must we do this? Where must we do that? Why can't we do what others were doing? And I said to some of those conversations, I went to a federal government college. I went to a public university. Throughout secondary school, I was on scholarship. Both O levels, A levels. University, I was on scholarship. Masters, I was on scholarship. The system has been good to me. Why will I do differently? And it was then, in fact, that's why I'm doing a lot of reflection that, and it's not to judge, but I'm also realizing that we don't give hope because we have not been given hope. Not many people have had the experiences I have had, or the benefit that I've had, or the opportunities. In those days, they will advertise scholarships. It was commonplace to advertise. Now people don't even know when people are advertising. And that is perhaps even sadder than what I mentioned before, the access to give people hope, to feel that there's opportunity. In fact, now I'm even realizing that, because sometimes I used to enter conversations and I used to feel some hostility, and I was wondering why. What have I done? Then I soon realized that, wait a minute, I probably represent a small percentage of the population that has experienced what I have experienced, just through the fact that I would say luck or location, and I thank my parents. But not many people have. And that made me realize that, do we understand, and I'll come back to the second point I was going to make, do we understand that we all have a duty to give people hope, even if we didn't get hope? Because sometimes, because we didn't get hope, we tend to are used to therefore not giving hope and just say, well, since I'm here, let me use the opportunity to get others so I can relate with where we are, is what I'm trying to say. And that is where it goes back to the president, that we need a vision of hope. And even if you've gone through bad experiences, even if you've not gone through those processes and you are there now, this is the consequence if you do give hope, because people don't know. If there was something you said at the beginning, that the only issue is execution. No, I think it's more than that. I think it's knowledge. I think it's exposure. I think it's understanding the consequences of not giving hope to people. So let me talk about the second point that I did. That what was the issue? As we're transiting from the old FRS to this new law, which meant that you must have a minimum of a degree to join. And we realized that a number of people didn't have it. One of the options was, well, we let people go or we send them back to the civil service. I think we even tried that, but civil service said they're not taking people. So I don't even know how the idea came about. And I said, okay, you know what? Why don't we just give that opportunity to go back to school? People fought it. No. We must come in. We have to spend time educating. I may not remember all the details. In fact, I think I may have to use some people that I work with to say, can you remember what happened at those times? But we ended up agreeing. Do you know? So we paid staff to go back to school. So another thing I see on the road, and these are adults, by the way, people say, if not for that opportunity, some have even gotten their PhD degree. Some have gotten their masters. I've seen children of those ones say, if not for what we did, they themselves will not have gone to school. So those are the two, and both examples are really about hope.
Mm.
People. And
Mm-hmm.
not just people. I used to say people, but about understanding our humanity. Understanding our humanity and recognizing that nobody is perfect. Recognizing that we're all going to make mistakes. How do we help each other and give each other hope?
Exactly.
Because by painting other persons down, they're going to fight. We're not going to achieve the results we want to achieve.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Let me invite listeners to please use the Q&A tab to post your questions. I will look at them, read them, and I'll attribute them to you. And the first one is from Dapo Awobeku. His question is, would you say the reforms you instituted stayed through despite the change in polity or politics? And how do you sustain reforms given the changing interests and priorities?
Okay, very good question. Would I say the reforms stayed through? How do you sustain reforms given changing priorities? I believe generally we're just about entering another reform process, aren't we? With the tax reforms going on. And between my time and now, we've had several finance acts. We've had National Tax Policy version 2, and I think version 3, if not going to version 4. So if you look at reforms from the perspective of continuous improvement, not a perspective of perfection, are there changes? Are there improvements? Are there things that have changed since the last time that I was there? I would say yes. Is where we are in the Nigerian tax system where I think we should be? No. Will where I want the national tax system to be there, will it happen tomorrow, in the next 5 years? No. It's a journey. And I think rather than say, oh, we have not done this, we have not done this, it's for each and every one of us to say, what can we do to improve the system? What are the gaps? During the recent tax bills and all that, we contributed, my firm contributed to changes in the laws. Some were taken, some were not taken. No, I don't even think it was, I don't even know what was taken in that regard. You know, we still have a group and we're going to keep at it. We're going to keep improving the system. I think it behoves on all of us. First of all, we should appreciate that to do any tax reform is not easy. It takes a lot of work. And these last tax reforms, a lot of engagement was done. You could argue, oh, we have not done this, we have not done that, we have not done that. But we must acknowledge the strengths and the interest to improve the system. And so to answer the question of how do we sustain reforms, just a continuous quest of improving the country for good. And where you think there's a step back, suggest otherwise, not as an individual, but as groups. No country is built by one person, but one person can make a difference.
Exactly.
Built.
Exactly. So there's a follow-on to that, and it's from Tony Bashir. And, she says, her question is, related to unraveling of reforms. She's had the privilege of working on reforms in the ease of doing business space and has seen how a change in leadership could lead to an erosion of the reform initiatives. And, she says this is quite common. Her question, therefore, is how have you sustained hope or a positive disposition in spite of these situations that appear to be quite frequent?
I don't know.
Mm.
What I can say is my faith and my beliefs. To sustain hope, I have a belief that the day I stop having hope, I'm dead. It's personal to me. So I'm always looking for what will give me hope. And they are there. There was a time when I was president of the Queen's College All Girls Association, and I went for a robotics competition. And I saw, and this was like 4 years ago, since I left office a long time. And I saw these young kids, the way they were answering questions from all over the country. Some of them had never done robotics before. And I said to myself, wow. Even though we may say we don't have this, we don't have this, we don't have this, we don't have this, they're coming here for the first time and they're showing incredible talent. That's a source of hope. And if one puts that at the back of your mind and you keep saying to yourself, how can you make this hope come alive? Then you know you have a lot of work to do.
Mm. Mm.
I see also young children who have decided that the best way to live their lives is through drug abuse. We have a drug problem.
Yes.
Okay, but I've allowed these young kids who I see in the robotics competition, I'm not wrongly, to say to myself, in spite of that, we should be thinking of how we can help those young kids so that they can discover themselves. That is, those that are going to do, so as I balance things, I see weakness here, but I see strength. And I say to myself, I can't do too much. I encourage others, pick something. But my faith is such that we're all here for a purpose. God did not create us by accident. Find your purpose, live it. You may not achieve everything you want to even throughout your lifetime, but celebrate your little wins and know that you've contributed your bit in discovering and in ensuring that you live out your purpose.
I have a very interesting question here from Yebom Alabi. She's an analyst with us. Her question is, can you give a practical example of how you tackled corruption that was staring you in the face? What was the trade-off, if any, that you had to make?
Corruption staring me in the face. So many. I gave one of fake tax clearance certificates, and we prosecuted to the very end. There's corruption with recruitment, because corruption is everywhere, in everything. People coming with forged certificates. Let me give an example. We had a policy that, because we had restructured the organization, and so it wasn't just tax people were looking for. Because then you didn't have people in facility management, communication, tax policy. You didn't even have specialty lines that required specialty training. So we opened up the service in our recruitment to people of different degrees, because we felt that it didn't really matter what you were studied, as long as you could, so for example, somebody who read Yoruba, if you could pass Yoruba and do it well, you went through a process. And it was that process we're interested in. And then we matched it with training for you to be able to now understand. And by the way, you may decide, if you now decided you wanted to be in the tax lane, you need to now do CITN, and we needed to back it up. And so provided that we could match those two. So that we opened it up So it wasn't driven by, oh, you have to have this particular degree or not. We didn't even say that, we're not taking third class. But we had instances of people who now come up with a certificate that they got 2-1. They now found out, go to the university and saw that they got a third class. So that was a disciplinary issue. And we had to let them go. I don't even know whether in the process they didn't come back, but that was an issue that we dealt with. Tax consultants was another issue. I mean, so depending on what you define as corruption, I really hate talking about corruption because for me, there's fraud, there's not applying your processes right, disregard for rules. Okay, there's one particular instance where I was written from the ministry. I was very upset with that, actually. I don't even know whether I was able to succeed with that. And I got a note that, okay, there was this there was this consultant that wanted to collect money from whether it was local governments or something. I said, no, this is not correct. And I wrote back, but the money had gone. So you do what you can do within your control. Some you see, some you don't see. But I don't carry corruption on my head that I'm fighting corruption. I just take it as leading an organization, putting in place controls, making sure the processes are right, putting in place a system, and ensuring that for any disciplinary action, there are consequences for it. And we have to even spell out, if you do this, this is the disciplinary consequence, because that was also not clear. And so that left it to the committee to decide which were the other, which we felt wasn't quite well. So we made issues of fake tax clearance certificates, negotiating with taxpayers. We emphasized the criminality of it because we're depriving the revenue of the country to invest in hospitals and so on. And we felt that such needed to be prosecuted. So those were the things we did. Some we could get, but some we couldn't get. And I don't know whether the culture was necessarily instilled in that regard. It's a tough one because you are dealing with an ecosystem that encourages certain things. So let me talk about the issue of even education and fake certificates. The larger ecosystem on education is an area that we need to also examine, because some of these certificates just get released. In fact, there are sometimes you are verifying certificates. You have to be sure who you are verifying the certificates with in the university. Otherwise, they'll tell you it's okay. So it's not just about within your system. It's part of an ecosystem that you have to deal with. And some you get, some you don't get. You're not going to get it all. I'm just discussing intent, but I'm not discussing results.
Yeah. Let me see if I can get a few more questions in. We're we're in the end now. There's a question from Caleb Obonna. He said, as a management consultant, which of the skills you developed over time came to bear in your time as a public servant? And also a second question, what enabled you to transit more from being in the private sector to the public sector and after service? How did you get back to reset? I think these are very interesting questions.
Okay, so 2 questions in one, right? What
Yeah.
skills as a management consultant
Helped you the most?
Just name it. Whether it's analytical skills, data skills, presentation
Change
skills,
management.
management skills, project. In fact, the whole tax reform is a project.
Yes.
Project management skills. I was the strategic management partner in my previous job, strategic management skills, determining when to bring in consultants, when to do it ourselves, decision making. So just say it all. Now, to the second point of what made to transit.
What enabled you transit from private to public?
Okay, if you don't see it as a transition, then there's no transition. So I just thought I was going for another job. And when the job was done, I moved to another job. I think that's probably the best way I can answer that question. So for me, it wasn't a transition. It was
That-
defining the job that needed to be done and realizing that in the public sector, the aspects of that job change because you have more stakeholders to deal with. And it's a lot more complex, but it doesn't change the fact that it's just another job.
Yes. I have another question from Val Amadi, and his question is really about the role of our culture, social culture, in institutional reforms. What role does it play? How does it influence it? The role of social culture in institutional reforms.
That's a topic I'm still pondering on because I think it does to a very large extent, so much so that we don't even understand it. And I think it's a research area. Probably they've done research in so many areas, but they need to publish it. It's very important. It's very, very important. When driving reforms, it's important that you understand that we're dealing with a complex environment. And the complexity of the environment is made even more so in a Nigerian setting. Why do I say that? We probably have over 500 ethnic groups. Each ethnic group comes with its own nuances and culture. Yes, there's some probably similarities, and that's something I would love to even, what are those common trends? But they come with their own nuances. Some people you are smiling, they're annoyed with you. Some people are annoyed, they're not smiling with you. Some people are happy with you, they're not smiling, or even behaviors. And then, so beyond the cultural changes and religious, okay, the religious complexity, and I'm not saying Christian, Muslim, atheist, traditional, no. It's even more complex than that. Within Christianity, there's so many different variants. There's so many different alliances. There's so many interests, so many beliefs. Same thing with Islam. Same thing with even atheism. Some believe in God, some know God, they don't believe. It's a complex environment. And I think that is what we really haven't appreciated the most. And if you therefore go into reform, recognizing the complexity, then it forces you to be intentional, very intentional. And maybe one thing that, coming back to the one thing that one done, we found ourselves checking how spread we were in the service. And where we were deficient, we sought out people. We sought out CVs. We sought out, oh, this group has not advertised. Do you have anybody from this area so that we can be balanced? Because you can't be meeting the national needs as a service and not be balanced geopolitically. We knew that that was going to be tough. And why? Not because of federal character. No. Why? Because I also come from a school. I mean, talking about skills, in fact, I would say one thing that really helped me the most is the learnings I got from my association with Franklin Covey and what it teaches. And one of the things it teaches is everybody is different. And you can't treat everybody the same. The other thing it teaches is that because everybody is different, when you are sitting around the table and you are not balanced geopolitically, how are you sure that the decisions you are taking are fair geopolitically? You can't. Because we all think differently. And if your exposure, your experiences are limited to just a particular part of the country, there is no way, no matter how fantastic or brilliant you are, that you're going to think well or effectively for another group. Because those beliefs get formed over the years. So I really love this question. By not factoring a social cultural complexity, it makes reforms even more difficult. But let me be more positive.
Yeah.
By factoring social cultural complexities, you're more likely to have more effective reforms.
Yeah. Here's another question, and we're really, coming up to the end, from Chinelugu, who is an analyst with us at Next Year. Are there things you would do differently if you if you were appointed back into government today?
Interesting question. You know, at some point I was invited to go back,
Yeah.
and I had to evaluate myself, evaluate what that meant, what the consequences were, and I said no. Being invited to government is an honor. And it's really an honor and a privilege. But what you're invited for must be aligned with who you are, where you are at a particular point in time, and what you define as success. And if all that aligns, then when you now get into that job, what you do different is going to be driven by what that job needs.
Can you still hear me?
Yes, I do.
Okay, good. This is probably my last question, and it's one I've kind of pondered, for a very long time. Do you think Nigeria's deepest institutional challenge today is a crisis of confidence? A lack of confidence in the idea that government people can build a society that we want to live in. If you think it is, how do you think we begin to rebuild that confidence in ourselves?
Now, the question is, do I think that the lack of confidence, you said the central challenge?
Yeah, is the biggest crisis that we're dealing with today. Just a lack of confidence that we can do this, and it manifests in many ways. We rely a lot on foreign advice, consultants, for things that we should be able to think through ourselves. We spend monies on, things that we shouldn't be spending money on, and then rely on other people to come and help us do things that we should be doing. That don't work, and instead of fixing them, we create other institutions. There seems to be a pervading sense that this country cannot work. And that becomes like a cloak over the people who should be exerting themselves every day trying to solve the problem. Do you agree with that thesis? And if yes, how do we begin to rebuild our confidence?
Let me give you a different perspective, because when you say the biggest crisis facing us, I don't know. But I can tell you that yes, there are confidence issues on some parts. But I'm a why person. Why do we feel we're not confident? Because until you get to that root cause, you really can't begin to solve the issue. Not having confidence is an outcome. It's an outcome of disappointments. It's an outcome of sometimes misaligned expectations. It's an outcome of lack of contentment. It's an outcome of not counting your blessing. It's an outcome of anger and frustration for systems that just haven't worked. It's an outcome of disappointments. You go with your proposal to a bank, The bank manager says, no, they can't fund it. The next you see the same bank manager running the project you went to the bank to do. It's an outcome of so many things. So I don't know what the biggest crisis is. But I can say that we haven't fully appreciated what we can do. We are sitting on fantastic talent across the country. No one part of this country doesn't have anything to build. We haven't appreciated that. We haven't appreciated that the world is looking for leadership, not presidential leadership per se, leadership of Nigerians in everything we're doing. Not just in their own countries, but in ours.
Mm-hmm.
We haven't appreciated that we may have a purpose as Nigerians to lead the world and pull all of us together to do it. We are stuck in quarrels, in our anger, in our frustrations. And to do this doesn't need everybody to do it. It requires a team united with a purpose to achieve that. We are stuck. We haven't appreciated the fact that doing one or two things that impacts everybody and then aligns everything else to that can begin to give people hope. So for me, that is the way I think. Not about locating the biggest crisis, but by elevating our thinking to what we must do and we should do to pull ourselves together. Think less about what divides us and think more about how we can pull ourselves together to make this country a much better place with a higher quality of life for everybody. And that's the way my mind is working.
Fantastic. 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 This has been good. Any last word from you? Maybe something we didn't cover?
A lot, but thank you. The last word is to say thank you. You've advanced my reflections. I mean, questions asked here have never been asked before. I appreciate being invited. I will reflect on this also, the sessions that you've had. I will appreciate also a summary of what has been said on the chat and so on. But I want to just say one thing, that the efforts we're discussing, I left office in 2012, and this is 2025. It's been a long time. The environment has changed, things have changed. But I still believe that certain things that held true then still hold true now. And the power of your belief, and the power of purpose, and the power of bringing people together, regardless of religion, ethnic group, age, gender, to achieve one common purpose is a very powerful pulling factor. And in our various spheres, whether it's government, private sector, family, those things matter.
Exactly.
Life is a journey. We don't always get what we want, but let's celebrate what we've achieved and take steps to just move forward, picking one or two things that we can close and say we've done, and then we now
Mm.
the rest for the others that come after us.
Fantastic,
Thank you.
fantastic. Ifueko, thank you so much for the invaluable insights, especially the positivity, that you brought to the conversation today. And ladies and gentlemen, in my view, Nigeria's problem is not that the elephants cannot dance. It's that we keep asking them to dance without music, and also while just tying their legs, and that's what we tried to discuss today on today's episode of Development Discuss. Big ideas, important questions, real conversations. Until next time, I'm Patrick Okibo. Let's keep building that society we want to live in. Thank you so much.